The shadow of the crown. A heavy silence pressed upon the chamber as Livia Marcellina's fingers clenched against the stone balustrade, her gaze fixed beyond the towering columns where shadows pooled like ink. The distant murmur of the court seeped through the thick walls, whispers weaving through the corridors like serpents. Each breath she drew was measured, cautious, as though the very air carried the weight of the conspiracies trapping her within this palace fortress. Behind her, footsteps approached, deliberate and cold. Cassian Valerius stepped into the dim light, his eyes sharp but weary, the faint scar tracing his jawline a testament to battles fought beyond these walls. "You linger long by the window, sister," he said, voice low. "Do you spy our enemies among the cypresses?" A flicker of sardonic humor crossed his face, barely masking the unease threading through his words. Livia's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, brittle as ancient parchment. Enemies are not only outside. Sometimes they wear the faces we trust. The air thickened as their shared history, lined with rivalry and fragile alliance, hung between them like a fragile web. Beneath the gilded mosaics, the court was a maelstrom of ambition and dread. Emperor Valerian Drusus, their father, ruled with a tempestuous hand, his gaze as relentless as the noonday sun. His shadow reached into every chamber, every whispered council. Rumors swirled around him, of executions carried out behind cloistered doors, of noble blood spilled for the faintest hint of disloyalty. Livia had been groomed for power in this crucible, her every lesson etched with the cold precision demanded by survival. Yet tonight, her heart trembled not with fear of her enemies, but with the weight of the cruel choice before her. Gaius Severin, the emperor's most trusted adviser and master of the court's labyrinthine intrigues, prowled like a vulture at every gathering. His words were silk, but his eyes cut like obsidian daggers. He had long seen Livia as a piece on this devastating chessboard, manipulating her allegiance to fortify his own designs. "Your marriage must be secured by unbreakable blood," he had murmured on more than one occasion, hinting at the union with Cassian. It was not madness or twisted desire, but calculated strategy. Forge a bond so primal that no faction could sunder it without destroying the dynasty itself. In this domain of stone and whispers, Livia's only solace was Octavia Drusa, a silent sentinel who bore the court's darkest secrets. Octavia's presence was unassuming, her loyalty hidden beneath layers of subservience. Yet her counsel had saved Livia more than once from fatal missteps. "Trust no man," Octavia once said, eyes steady beneath a veil of calm. "Not even your brother. The line between ally and adversary is finer than a blade's edge." This truth gnawed at Livia, for Cassian was both her shield and the source of her deepest uncertainty. The bond they shared was treasured, forged in childhood memories of shared laughter and whispered assurances in nights too dangerous for dreams. Marcus Tiberian, Cassian's half-brother and the Empire's trusted general, was an enigma wrapped in unyielding loyalty. Yet even he held secrets darker than the armor he bore. His allegiance was not given freely, each nod and command measured as if the cost could be counted on the blades that filled the imperial armory. Livia observed him from afar, pondering whether ambition simmered beneath his stoic surface, threatening to upend the fragile balance of power. Sabina Quinctilla, the ancient nurse who had tended to the royal children, carried the echoes of the past within her weary bones. Her whispered confidences to Livia, were as vital as the medicine she applied, tales of betrayal and survival, written in the faint scars that mark the palace's hidden history. Blood binds, but blood also betrays, Sabina often warned, a bitter bitterness underpinning her advice. It was a cruel testament to a house where love was never simple, where every smile concealed a dagger's edge. In one late evening's council, the imperial chamber thrummed with tension as Valerian Drusus's heavy voice boomed across the marble. The Empire demands strength, unyielding and pure. Our enemies gather in the shadows. Only unity within the bloodline can withstand their onslaught. His eyes locked on Livia and Cassian, unspoken threats hiding beneath paternal command. The room held its breath as hurried glances passed between courtiers, the air crackling with the specter of betrayal. Livia's heart echoed the unspoken words of allegiance and sacrifice. Marrying her brother was a vow heavy with consequence, a strategy wrapped in despair. It was not desire that drove her to this irrevocable step, but the iron-clad belief that only through this bond could the Empire endure. Outside, the night deepened, the stars veiled by heavy clouds, a mirror to the obscured path ahead. Cassian's voice broke the silence again, softer this time. "I do not stand unafraid, but the throne's cruel demands have never been for the faint of heart." His gaze searched Livia's for resolve, finding there the same fierce determination that had fueled their shared childhood. In that moment, amidst the suffocating stone and heavy shadows, the siblings found a fragile truce in their shared fate. As the court retreated behind bolted doors and whispered counsel, Octavia moved silently to Livia's side, passing a folded scroll with a subtle nod. "There are those who would see you fall, sister. Keep your allies close and your enemies closer." The weight of her words settled like a cloak upon Livia's shoulders, heavy but necessary. The palace itself seemed to breathe with secrets, each corridor a reminder that power was both sanctuary and prison. Behind the iron-grilled windows, the flicker of torches cast dancing shadows that played over faces etched with fear and ambition. In the enveloping darkness, a single truth prevailed. Trust was a commodity rarer than gold, and survival hinged on decisions cold and merciless. As dawn threatened on the horizon, the fragile alliance between Livia and Cassian was sealed not in passion but in necessity, a silent vow amidst the ruins of trust. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and political storms that could drown them all. Yet within this darkened palace, where loyalty was measured in whispered betrayals and fleeting glances, the siblings stood united. Two fractured souls bound by blood, poised on the knife edge of destiny. The rising sun, veiled behind storm-laden clouds, hinted at inevitable revelations. Beyond the sealed chambers, shadows shifted, and the game of power would soon demand its deadly opening move. Bound by blood and silence. The faint scrape of sandals against cold stone echoed through the shadowed corridor, masking the quiet storm that raged behind curtained eyes. Livia Marcellina stood with her back pressed against the lattice of a narrow window, her gaze fixed beyond the palace walls, where twilight swallowed the city whole. Her fingers curled briefly, betraying a tremor she otherwise kept sealed beneath layers of royal discipline. Beside her, Cassian Valerius spoke with a voice as low and worn as the stones beneath their feet. "Every step away from the throne feels like a step into a noose, sister." The words hung, heavy with unspoken threats. Within these walls, beauty was no refuge. and blood was the sternest law. Livia's decision was no whim born of passion or madness, but a calculated defiance drawn from years of shadowed lessons. She recalled Sabina Quintilla, whose aged hands once folded her small ones with a softness now almost disconcerting. The nursemaids whispered tales of fallen dynasties, of love turned poison, clawed at her resolve. Every whisper felt like a blade, every glance a trial. To marry Cassian was more than taboo. It was a gamble that sealed their fates in ink darker than betrayal. Yet, in this austere pact lay their shield against the court's ravenous appetite. Far below in the war room, the flicker of torchlight cast elongated figures against cold marble. Marcus Tiberian paced as his thoughts fractured like broken glass. The general's heart waged war against his duties, torn between the blood that bound him to Livia and the loyalty he owed the wary Valerian Drusus. Each message from the outer provinces bred unease, each murmur of dissent a crack in the empire's fragile facade. Marcus's gaze drifted to the iron-bound door, where shadows pooled like secrets waiting to consume. Loyalty was no certainty. It twisted and throbbed like a living thing in the tempest of power. Gaius Severin's presence was as inevitable as decay at court. His smile was a blade sheathed in silk, his words serpentine traps that even the most prudent might stumble into. He circled the siblings like a predator, weaving subtle threads of discord with half-audible insinuations, that Cassian's grasp was too loose, that Livia's choices were seeds of ruin rather than salvation. Yet, Severin underestimated the fire kindled in Livia's chest, one nurtured not by hope, but by brutal necessity. She bartered with shadows, her marriage proposal a declaration in a language few dared utter aloud. The price was steep, but the alternative was the dismemberment of everything she had been raised to protect. In the quiet corners of the palace, Octavia Drusa moved like a phantom, woven from dusk. Her task, though subtle, wielded as much danger as open confrontation. The keeper of whispered truths and unseen keys, Octavia understood the palace better than anyone surviving its merciless games. She carried secrets in the crease of her handprints, secrets that could topple kings or cradle rebellions in fragile palms. To Livia, she was both anchor and blade, a companion in solitudes no one else endured. Their bond was forged amid white lies and darker reckonings, each knowing the cost of survival was often a measured sacrifice of loyalty. Valerian Drusus remained an omnipresent specter over every move in the court's grim theater. His gaze bore the weight of empires and the cold precision of a man who had long ceased to tremble at the consequences of power. Every calculated silence, every reluctant decree sharpened the axis on which their fates turned. The emperor's looming presence drove the siblings closer. Their decision to unite was a desperate bulwark against his subtle tyranny. Yet within this alliance lurked the danger of their own undoing, for the palace's walls had long ears, and within them even trust was a currency as perilous as any weapon. Their marriage was no pastoral idyll, but a fortified alliance, an unspoken vow to guard against the lethal intrigues that thrived beneath gilded chandeliers. Cassian and Livia, bound by blood and silence, understood the razor's edge upon which they balanced. Each glance from Cassian was a silent question, each measured expression from Livia a resolve hardened by nights steeped in whispered conspiracies. The court awaited their next move, sensing the tremor of change beneath the veneer of ritual and command. As dusk deepened into night, the royal chambers seemed to hold their breath. Behind the heavy tapestry, a figure lingered, Sabina Quinctilla, eyes shadowed by years and knowledge. Her past wove through the family's lineage like a hidden thread, crucial and fragile. In her silence rested stories that could unravel the carefully constructed facade or fortify it irrevocably. She gave no counsel lightly. Every word was weighed against the ever-present threat of discovery and death. Tension coiled tighter still when a brief exchange in the dim library exposed fractures in allegiance. Marcus's voice, usually steady as a shield wall, faltered as he confided doubts to Octavia. The rebellion's embers, fanned by Severin's veiled manipulations, threatened to ignite chaos. Trust waned like a dying flame. Too many moved like shadows, betraying loyalty for survival. Livia's choice cast ripples through this fractured web of power. It was not out of desire, nor is it sin, but a final bid for survival, a throne held by those willing to sacrifice not only love, but morality. The court buzzed quietly, its heartbeats syncing with the soft footfalls in hollow corridors. Conspirations whispered between flickering candles. All eyes strained to decipher the meaning behind the forbidden union, yet none could foresee the cost it would demand. In the fragile pause before darkness claimed the night fully, every secret held its breath. Livia's resolve crystallized like steel forged in fire, a grim promise that the fortress of blood and silence would not fall without a fight. Outside, the murmur of restless streets seeped in, mingling fear with anticipation. The Empire waited, poised on the edge of a blade that could cut either way. The air thickened with the weight of impending decisions, tightening the noose of fate around every player in this grand, cruel game. Behind the veil of loyalty, the slow, deliberate dance of power spun ever onward. And as the palace doors closed softly behind a departing shadow, the scene shifted imperceptibly, trading one secret chamber for another, where new dangers stirred beneath the silence. The price of empire. The heavy silence in the grand chamber throbbed like a living pulse. Sabina Quinctilla's voice, dark as the cellars beneath the palace, cut through the stillness. He was never your brother. Livia Marcelina's hand tightened on the tapestry beside her, knuckles paling. The courtiers exchanged restless glances, breaths held and breaths stolen away by the weight of that single sentence. The flickering torchlight cast cruel shadows on marble walls, heavy with dust and secrets, reflecting the fractures beneath the glittering veneer of power. Cassian Valerius stepped forward with measured pace, the iron of his gaze slicing through the whispered storms. His trust, once unshakable, now trembled on an unseen edge. If blood does not bind us, what then remains? His voice bore the quiet force of a man whose world was built on loyalty and broken bonds alike. Around him, the labyrinth of hushed plots and whispered treasons thickened, and the looming figure of Valerian Drusus watched from a gilded throne, the emperor's face unreadable, but for the cold gleam of his eyes. Livia met Cassian's look without flinching, the weight of her decision settling like stones on her chest. She had been shaped by power's crucible, forged in an environment where love bowed to strategy. Her marriage to Cassian was no sanctuary from the storm, but a chessboard where every smile disguised a threat and silence was a weapon sharper than any blade. Octavia Drusa lingered at the room's edge, shadows folding around her like a second skin. She was the keeper of secrets, the soft guardian of places too perilous to speak aloud. Their eyes met briefly, a signal understood only by two souls who bore witness to the palace's deepest wounds. Outside, corridors echoed with the measured steps of Marcus Tiberian, a general whose allegiance was a flickering candle in a chamber darkened by suspicion. His loyalty was questioned, his past a tapestry interwoven with whispers of rebellion. There was no certainty under the emperor's austere gaze, only the unyielding pull of survival. Gaius Severan's presence was felt in the room even before he entered, a man slim and sharp as a dagger, weaving his web of manipulation with the cruel precision of a master puppeteer. His words would be spoken carefully, each syllable a trap sprung quietly in the shadows. Sabina's revelations were like poison lacing the air, turning trust into treachery. The past, buried beneath layers of forgotten promises and silent betrayals, clawed its way to the surface, threatening to unravel all the fragile ties binding the court together. Livia's choice to unite with Cassian carried the weight of 1,000 unseen axes. She had bet everything on a bond much more complex than simple blood. The palace was no longer a palace but a battlefield, where every gesture was laden with threat, and every whispered conversation could signal death. In the glimmering depth of Livia's eyes lived the hard truths shaped by nights spent in the cold embrace of stone corridors. Her marriage was neither love nor desire, but a calculated survival. The cost of empire was penned in sacrifices silent and unseen, a price paid in quiet despair and stealthy smiles. Valerian's shadow cast long, reaching into corners where hatred mingled with fear, and where power danced in deadly steps. The tension between Cassian and Marcus simmered, a slow burn beneath words too carefully chosen to trust. Octavia's quiet presence was a flicker of fragile hope amid the dark expanse. She was the bearer of secrets that could shatter or save. Her whispered counsel to Livia was an act of rebellion cloaked in discretion, a reminder that even in the direst of places, allegiance might yet bend toward something greater than fear. The interplay of loyalty and deceit wound tightly like the vines creeping along the ancient palace walls, impossible to reveal without tearing the entire fabric apart. Days blurred into nights under the relentless gaze of Valerian Drusus, a ruler who measured the world with cold precision, squeezing fear from his subjects like juice from fruit. His empire was built on obedience forged in pain, and his presence was not merely political, but existential, an oppressive weight that shaped destinies and fractured souls. In this suffocating atmosphere, the princess's vow to wed her brother was a bold stroke on a canvas painted with shadows, a plan incomprehensible to those trapped in simpler schemes of love or ambition. Cassian wrestled with the ghosts of blood and betrayal, the definition of kinship twisted by secrets half-remembered and lies told in the dark. His trust was a fragile ember in the whirlwind of palace intrigue, vulnerable to the smallest breeze of suspicion or fear. Each conversation, each glance exchanged with Livia was a battlefield quiet as the grave, where victory meant survival and defeat promised oblivion. The weight of unspoken truths pressed upon them both, forging a bond that was less about affection and more about necessity. Meanwhile, Gaius Severan moved in shadow, his ambitions sharpened by every fragment of discord. His whispered provocations sought to widen the cracks in the fragile alliance binding the siblings. Yet, even as he plotted, the unexpected loyalty of Marcus Tiberian complicated the dark chess match. The general's motives were inscrutable, his allegiance fluctuating between the call of blood and the lure of power. His presence was a constant reminder that, in a palace ruled by fear, there were no true friends, only survivors fighting to keep their heads. Sabina's final words hung in the air long after she retreated, a haunting echo in the minds of those left behind. The palace, with its towering columns and endless passages, became a labyrinth where every shadow might conceal a knife, and every smile mask a dagger. Livia's marriage was far from a haven. It was the crucible where strength was tested, not in open conflict, but in the cold calculation of silence and subtlety. In this deadly game, love was a luxury long forsaken, and power was the only truth to cling to. The night deepened beyond the windows, as Valerian Drusus's presence filled the throne room like a storm waiting to break. Every breath, every movement was a testament to the brutal cost of survival in a world where mercy was weakness and trust a dangerous gamble. Livia's gaze drifted to the heavy doors, beyond which the palace breathed secrets and shadows. Her vow was no simple defiance. It was the final play on a board stained with blood and betrayal, where every step forward was paid for in sacrifice. The tapestry of alliances and betrayals wove tighter, as the players in this deadly dance moved closer to an unseen reckoning. Silence stretched, thick and oppressive, broken only by the shifting tension in the air. The fate of the empire balanced on choices made in quiet moments, in glances exchanged across cold stone halls. In the heart of the palace, where fear was the currency and power the prize, Livia and Cassian stood poised on the precipice, the past's shadows lengthening behind them, and the uncertain dawn gathering just beyond the horizon.